I discovered that my parents gave their savings to my sister so she could buy a house, so I stopped paying their bills. A month later, my father called. "They're going to cut off our electricity if you don't pay the bill." I just smiled and said, "Before the story begins, if you like our channel, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers." And now, we invite you to enjoy a story with an unexpected ending. For as long as I can remember, I have always put my family first. My parents never had a comfortable retirement, and as a responsible son, I made sure to help them. When I graduated and landed a good job, I started paying their household bills, electricity, water, gas, even small renovations when needed. I never complained. In my mind, it was the least I could do for the people who raised me. My sister, Emily, was always the family's darling. Since childhood, she never had to worry about anything. Our parents treated her as if she were made of glass, while I was always the strong one, the one who didn't need affection or praise. When she decided to get married, they helped with the wedding. When she wanted to open a small business but had no money, guess what? They gave it to her. And me? I kept paying the bills, making sure they never lacked comfort, but nothing could have prepared me for the discovery I was about to make. It was an ordinary day, like any other. After work, I stopped by their house to drop off a check for the monthly bills. Mom was especially excited, and it didn't take long before she let it slip. "Emily finally bought her dream house. Your father and I helped with a good sum, of course. After all, she deserves it." My heart stopped for a moment. "Wait. What?" I asked, trying to process those words. My father, sitting in his armchair with the TV on, shrugged. "We gave her our savings so she could make the down payment on the house. We didn't want her to take on a big loan." I felt my blood boil. "Your savings? The same savings you always claimed not to have when I asked if you needed anything? The same savings you never mentioned while I was here, month after month paying your bills so you wouldn't have to worry?" My mother rolled her eyes as if I were overreacting. "Oh, sweetheart, don't be dramatic. Emily needs it more than you do. You have a good, stable job. She, on the other hand, she's never had to worry about anything." My voice came out louder than I intended. My father sighed, impatient. "Stop this. You've always helped without complaining. And frankly, we expected you to keep helping." The coldness in his words hit me like a punch in the gut. They saw no problem in what they had done. To them, I was just a constant financial provider, someone who was there to ensure their comfort while Emily received all the privileges. In that moment, something inside me broke. I had always been proud of my generosity, but I realized that to my parents, I was never a son. I was just a provider. And that day, I made the decision that would change everything. I was driving back home, but my mind was in chaos. The conversation with my parents echoed in my head, each word weighing heavier than the last. They had savings all along, yet they never mentioned it. They never used that money to ease my burden, not even to pay a single bill. No, they chose to give everything to my sister. That night was the first in many years that I allowed myself to feel something other than resignation. I had always accepted my role in the family. I was the one who sacrificed, the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything in return. But for the first time, I realized how unfair it all was. I picked up my phone and called my sister, Emily. She answered on the third ring, her voice light and carefree. "Hey, big bro, what's up?" I took a deep breath. "Did you know that our parents used all their savings to buy your house?" On the other end of the line, there was an awkward silence. She hesitated before replying, Yeah, they told me they'd help." "Why?" "Why?" My voice came out filled with disbelief. "Because I spent years paying their bills thinking they had nothing saved. Meanwhile, they were setting money aside just to give to you." She let out an impatient sigh. "Look, it's not a big deal. They did it because they wanted to, and I really needed it. You know how hard it is to buy a house these days." "I wanted to buy a house too one day, Emily, but I never had that luxury. I always prioritized our parents. She laughed as if I were being dramatic. Oh, come on, you make good money. It's not like you're struggling. And that's when it hit me. Emily saw nothing wrong with it. To her, it was natural for me to sacrifice. It was natural for our parents to give everything to her. She felt no guilt, no remorse, and worse, neither did our parents. The next day I went back to their house. I needed to look them in the eye and see if they even understood what they had done. When I arrived, my mother was in the kitchen making coffee. "You look tired," she remarked without even glancing at me. "I had a rough night," I replied. She poured herself a cup, not bothering to offer me one. A small detail, but suddenly it said so much. "I came here because I need to understand," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I spent years helping you, never asking for anything in return. You had that money saved and decided to give all of it to Emily, without even considering that I might need help too." She sighed as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't understand. You've always been independent. You never needed us for anything. But your sister? She's always been more fragile." I laughed, but it wasn't out of joy. It was disbelief. Fragile? She had every opportunity. You paid for her college, her car, her trips. I had to fight for every single one of those things. "And you did, didn't you?" my father interjected, stepping into the kitchen. "You turned out fine, son. Emily, not so much. We were just trying to balance things out." My heart sank. They truly believed that. They saw nothing wrong with it. I would never be seen as someone who needed help because, to them, I never mattered as much as Emily. The anger I felt was unlike anything before. But beyond the anger came clarity. It was time to stop carrying a burden that was never mine to bear. I looked at them one last time, memorized the scene. My mother sipping her coffee calmly, my father flipping through the newspaper as if nothing had happened. And then, without another word, I turned around and walked away. They didn't know it yet, but that had been the last bill I would ever pay. I spent the entire day with a knot in my chest. The anger came and went in waves, but along with it, there was another feeling, one I hadn't experienced in a long time: freedom. For the first time, I saw clearly that my life didn't revolve around pleasing my parents. I no longer had to be the son who endured everything, who always said yes without hesitation. That night I sat at my kitchen table and picked up the notebook where I used to track my finances. For years my financial routine had been the same. My salary would come in, and before even considering any personal expenses, I would set aside money to pay my parents' bills. It was automatic, like breathing. But now that obligation no longer existed. I picked up the phone and, without overthinking, it dialed the number for the electric company. "Hello, I'd like to remove my name as the responsible payer for my parents' residence." The representative confirmed my details, and in less than 3 minutes, something that had bound me for years was broken. Then, I did the same with the water bill, and the home insurance, and every other expense I had carried alone for so long. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. It's over. For the first time in years, those words tasted sweet, but I knew it wouldn't take long for the phone to ring, and sure enough, it didn't. The next morning, my father called. I ignored the first call, then the second, but on the third, I picked up. "What happened to the electricity bill?" I got a notice that the payment wasn't made. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "What happened is that I stopped paying." A heavy silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean you stopped paying?" He let out a short laugh, but it wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. "Simple. You had savings all along but chose to give it all to Emily. That means you never really needed me to pay anything. So I'm out. From now on, you're responsible for your own bills. You can't be serious." I've never been more serious in my life. His breathing grew heavier. Is this some kind of revenge? I let out a humorless laugh. No, it's just reality. For years you used me. I accepted it because I thought it was the right thing to do. Because I thought you needed me, but now I see that you never did. And if you didn't need me then, you don't need me now. He was silent for a moment, then his voice came sharp. You're ungrateful. I swallowed hard, but I didn't let him hear it. Me? Ungrateful? After everything I did for you? You're abandoning us. No, Dad. I'm just letting you take care of your own life. Just like I've always taken care of mine, alone. He huffed, furious. You're overreacting. I'm done, Dad. If you had money to give to Emily, then you have money to pay your own bills. And then I hung up. My heart was pounding, but deep down I knew I had done what needed to be done. They expected me to back down, to give in, like always. But this time, there was no turning back. I had just reclaimed my freedom, and I had no intention of losing it again. In the days that followed, silence reigned. No calls, no messages. I knew my parents were processing my decision, maybe even convinced that I would change my mind. But I wouldn't. Then, one night, as I was unwinding after work, my phone rang. My father's name lit up on the screen. I sighed and let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again, and then again. Something inside me told me this call would be different. I answered, "Hello." My father's voice came through, filled with frustration and desperation. "They're going to cut off our electricity if you don't pay the bill." I paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't try to have a conversation. He just demanded, like always. But this time, I wasn't playing their game anymore. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. He was silent for a moment, maybe surprised by my coldness. Then he huffed. "You know exactly what I want. I need you to pay this bill. We're out of money right now." I let out a short laugh. "Oh, interesting. Out of money? But just a month ago, you had enough to give to Emily. How does that work? Exactly?" "That was different," he shot back quickly. "It was an investment in her future." "And who invests in my future, Dad?" Silence. "You've always managed just fine on your own." Those words hit me like a familiar weight. Always the same excuse. As if the fact that I had worked hard my entire life was justification for never receiving anything in return. "That's right. And I'll keep managing just fine. But now, you'll have to learn to do the same." My mother took the phone. Her voice was laced with forced sweetness. "Sweetheart, we know you were upset, but you don't have to be so extreme. We're your parents." "Exactly," I cut in. "You are my parents. But strangely, you never really cared about being parents to me." She let out a heavy sigh. "We thought you would understand." Understand? My patience was wearing thin. Understand that I was nothing more than an ATM to you? The silence on the other end was my answer. My father came back on the line, now clearly irritated. "If you think you can just abandon us like this, you're making a big mistake." I crossed my arms, feeling an unexpected sense of calm wash over me. "Funny, Dad. I was thinking the exact same thing about you." And then, before he could say another word, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I put myself first. And for the first time, my parents were feeling the weight of their own choices. After that call, a heavy silence settled in. My parents didn't call again. Neither did Emily. It was as if all of a sudden I had ceased to exist for them. But for the first time in my life, that didn't hurt. On the contrary, in the first few days, there was a strange feeling in the air, like something was missing. It wasn't guilt. It was the habit of living for them, an automatic reflex that no longer made sense. I didn't have to calculate my finances around their bills anymore. My money was mine. My life was mine. And then, the unexpected happened. One random afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk, please." I knew immediately that it was my mother. I ignored it. Minutes later, another message came in. "Your father is sick. Things are difficult here. We just want to talk." I closed my eyes, feeling a knot in my stomach. They were trying to play on my conscience, but something inside me told me not to give in. So, I waited. A week passed, then 2. Until one day, as I was leaving work, I saw a car parked in front of my building. And there they were. My parents. My father looked thinner, his hair grayer. My mother clutched her purse tightly, as if it were a shield. I sighed, crossing my arms. "What are you doing here?" My mother smiled, but her eyes were filled with pleading. "Can we talk?" I remained silent for a few moments. Then I made a vague gesture. "Make it quick." She took a deep breath before speaking. "Your father really isn't well. We're out of money and we don't know what to do." I looked at them for a moment. "You could have saved. You could have planned. But you chose to give everything to Emily. We thought she would help us later," my mother murmured, her voice breaking. I let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, right. And where is she now?" Silence. Emily had her new house, her perfect life. But she wasn't here, because she had never learned to carry responsibilities. My mother took a deep breath, her eyes shining with expectation. "You've always taken care of us." I met her gaze, and that was a mistake. Her eyes widened in shock. My father furrowed his brows, unable to believe what he was hearing. "I'm not here to save you this time. I'm not the son who endures everything anymore." My mother started crying. "You're really going to leave us like this?" My response was calm but firm. "No. I'm just letting you take responsibility for your own choices." They stood there frozen. For the first time, they realized I wasn't going to back down. I walked into my building without looking back. That day, I understood that true self-love isn't about selfishness, it's about not letting yourself be used as an endless resource. I didn't lose my parents. They lost me. And for the first time in my life, I felt free.